Hey everybody, this is Miss Peachy joining you again. Here we are in Biology B of Wisconsin Connections Academy, Unit 7 on Natural Selection, Lesson 4, Heredity and Reproductive Success. All right, guys and gals, so our key words for this lesson are data analysis, dependent variable, graph, independent variable, locus, single nucleotide polymorphism, haplotype mapping, and phenotypic plasticity. So there's some new stuff in this lesson, and actually some stuff that I wasn't even familiar with, some kind of newer stuff in genetics. So pay attention because this is not necessarily review from the stuff from your previous lessons. There's new information. It does add on to or build on stuff we've already done before, though. So you'll find hopefully some overlap. Don't forget, ladies and gentlemen, there is a link beneath my picture here on my website, and it does have a notes guide for you to use on this lesson, as always, right? All right, so here's a little cutie. This is a red panda. Isn't it cute? Oh, adorable. They live in the steep mountain forests of Asia, and they eat lots of bamboo. They share resources with their their neighbors, the famous giant panda, the black and white panda, right? However, there's not as many red pandas left in the wild. It says some estimate that there's less than 10,000. Um, they are endangered, so scientists are studying these guys. So, talk a little bit about how natural selection. Remember, we talked about that before, that a driving factor behind natural selection is competition. Organisms compete for resources. Those that have the adaptations that help them to get the resources, they will survive, be able to reproduce, and pass on their genes to their offspring. If they can't get the resources, they die and they can't reproduce and their genes are lost. And if a species doesn't have the resources needed to get the food or space or whatever it would need for survival, the whole species can not do very well. So that's kind of what this first slide is talking about. Then it just is reviewing a little bit about genetics. So remember that we have DNA, and DNA is, you've got different chromosomes all within your genes or within your nucleus of your cells. And on each chromosome is a different kind of chunk of your DNA. That within them there are genes, and that a gene that codes for a specific trait is called an allele. There are variations of genes, and those variations are alleles. For example, the gene for eye color has different variations, and those variations are different alleles for eye color, right? We've talked about this before. Brown eyes or green eyes, those represent the different alleles. A new term that we have here is the term locus. And locus is the same place on the chromosome where that particular allele is found. And it's found on the exact same place in every single person. So it's not like all randomly located. The allele for eye color on my chromosomes are in the same place as the allele for eye color on your chromosomes, right? So that's what the term locus means. So every strand of DNA is made up of 4 nucleotides, the A's, T's, C's, and G's, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And every species, each nucleotide appears in a specific location on the DNA strand in a specific order. So those A's, T's, C's, and G's that spell out the code that makes up you is the same as that spells out the code that makes up me, right? The differences are the alleles can be different, but the actual code in the order in which it is the same. If there's a change in the code in the order, this is called like a single change. It is called a single nucleotide polymorphism. It's a mutation. It is abbreviated SNP for single nucleotide polymorphism, and they pronounce it SNP. This is called a SNP. So when scientists look at specific locus, a specific place on the chromosome for pandas, they expect to see a specific sequence of A, T's, C's, and G's. In sometimes, however, that when they're expecting, for example, to see a T, instead they see an A, or instead they see a C or a G. So there's one little a nitrogenous base that has been replaced with a different one little substitution, if you will. And this is called a SNP, right? And this is a mutation. This is a type of mutation we talked about previously in the first semester. And so they can look at that specific loci for a bunch of different pandas. And for some pandas, they'll see what they expect to see, and some they'll see the SNP instead. And it allows them to track how closely those pandas are related to each other. Because those that have the SNP are going to have mutated at some point, and they're more closely related to each other than they are to the groups that don't have that SNP. Because once they have that SNP, and this is a substitution mutation that is not, it's not a lethal mutation, it's not probably beneficial mutation, it's just one of those neutral mutations, don't do anything, but it's still there. It doesn't lead to any changes in the physical appearance of the panda, it doesn't lead to any sort of detriments to the panda, but it's still there. So it's a silent mutation, right? But even though it's a silent mutation, it still allows scientists to see that there's a slight difference in the code between the pandas, the red pandas that have the SNP and those that don't. And so we know there's a slight difference. They must all have inherited that difference from the panda that had it to begin with. So they're more closely related to each other than those that don't have the SNP. So they can track this in populations of pandas. Remember that a population is a group of organisms that are all the same species that live kind of in the same area, right? And that's a population, but they're all a single species. And this type of tracking of the populations using these SNPs is called a haplotype map or haplotype mapping. And it's a test. They can use a DNA test to establish the ancestry of individuals. In other words, who is related to who and who's more closely related to who. So they do this to study the populations of red pandas. It says in this particular study, they used data from 64 red pandas from 4 distinct population groups. And they named the 4 different population groups: population A, population B, population C, and population D. So those are our 4 groups. And then they were able to graph kind of that information through process of data analysis. They're analyzing it. So the graph allowed them to see similarities and differences among the population. So in this case, the population is the independent variable. So this is the thing that you're changing. You're changing, I'm going to select pandas from this group, pandas from this group, pandas from this group, and pandas from this group. So the pandas that I select are what I am as an experimenter changing. That's called my independent variable. It's sometimes called the manipulated variable as well. The dependent variable is what happens as a result. So the diversity in nucleotides, the actual SNPs that I count. I mean, I can't have any effect on that, but the populations that I choose determine how many SNPs they're going to be, right? So that's our dependent variable. The dependent variable is also sometimes called the responding variable. Personally, guys, I prefer the terms manipulated and responding to independent and dependent, but you're going to see both terms used in various places. So it's a good idea to have familiarity with both terms and realize that independent is AKA manipulated and dependent is AKA responding. And this is cool. I never used this acronym before, but they're using an acronym dry mix to help you remember that the dependent variable, which is also known as a responding variable, you always put it on the y-axis when you're graphing. And the independent variable, which is also known as the manipulated variable, is always put on the x-axis when you're graphing. So when you graph variables, that's how it always goes. And if you're selecting different groups, that's generally going to be your independent variable. So if I'm going to see, okay, boys versus girls, we're going to see, if there's a difference in how much you eat for breakfast. The boys versus girls is going to be your independent variable, and what you eat for breakfast is your dependent variable, right? In this case, we're doing panda group A, B, C, and D, and what type of genes you have. And so the selected group is my independent variable. The type of alleles that we find are our dependent variable. So they give you some data, what they saw, the number of segregating sites. As you can see, there's a lot fewer in group B. And then the diversity, those numbers are so small, sometimes it's hard to make heads or tails of that. What they eventually say is they found that, hang on, I may not have, I did read this, but okay. According to this study, I went too far. It says that red panda populations A, C, and D have more genetic diversity or variation than population B. And you can see that A, C, and D have more diversity than population B. And so that was kind of a distinct difference. That was something that they were able to determine as a conclusion here. That was found using this information. So what they figured is that there's actually two different species of red pandas here. That population B, I believe, is actually the Himalayan red panda, and populations A, C, and D are actually the Chinese red panda. And so they all eat bamboo, and both species are actually being affected by deforestation. They're actually cutting down a lot of the bamboo forests and stuff. Climate change affects the bamboo forests as well, which puts pressure on the populations. So both populations, Himalayan and Chinese pandas, or there's four populations, but both species are both being affected by the fact that the bamboo forests are kind of going away. However, what they're finding, and they wanted a question they were asked, is they wanted to know why the Chinese populations were more genetically diverse. Why is it that there's more diversity than there is in the Himalayan panda population, even though they're all red pandas? And again, an outwardly appearance, they're going to look the same, right? Because this one SNP isn't affecting their phenotype at all. And what they realized here is that there's a difference in their environment. Himalayan pandas tend to live in forests. Forests that they live in are very stable and they don't change very much over time. So their environment is the same from generation to generation. So they have to have kind of the same adaptations throughout the whole population to be able to survive and thrive in that very uniform, unchanging environment. Whereas the Chinese panda populations live in a variety of different environments. And because they live in a variety of different environments, they have a diverse number of adaptations because those adaptations are going to be different depending on which environment those particular red pandas live in. So over time, they develop more genetic diversity simply because their environment is actually more diverse as well. So the adaptations that they need to be successful within a large array of different environments are gonna also be very different. If you're living in a colder environment as a red panda, you may have slightly different adaptations than those that live in a slightly warmer climate or wetter versus drier. But Chinese pandas have such a wide range of environment that you'll see a very wide range of adaptations, which leads to more diversity, more genetic diversity. So you see a linkage between, a changing environment and genetic diversity versus a very stable, unchanging environment and low genetic diversity. And let's see here. And then the last kind of chunk that they talk about here is group behavior and how group behavior can increase an individual's chance of reproduction and survival, which therefore increases the species' success. I think we kind of talked about this before already. So types of group behaviors includes actions such as hunting together, grooming one another, protecting territory and young, and caring for relatives. And it goes on to give some examples of lions living in prides and hunting together and their kind of hunting strategies, and meerkats. They live in family groups or multiple families combined together to form a mob or clan, and their family structures, including babysitters and dominant females and their hunting behaviors, but how this group behavior also increases a chance of survival. And again, I think that's one we've actually covered before as well. And then lastly, you've got slides 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13, which is just questions and answers and some videos which I will leave to you guys to watch. The only other thing I wanted to point out was on this practice question, this really kind of drew my attention a little bit here. It says natural selection has sometimes been called an arms race. Species develop adaptations, counter adaptations in the struggle to survive. Consider what you know about natural selection, answer the following questions. So just to think about adaptation or natural selection as being kind of, what kind of characteristics are best fit for survival. And so if you've got multiple organisms that are in the same area and really want to occupy the same biological niche, and they all possess adaptations to help them in that, you know, kind of, I guess, competition to fill that niche, the one that has the best adaptation is going to win. So they're competing. So they may all have certain arms or certain weapons because that's what you think of with an arms race. But the one that has the best and most efficient wins. And this goes on from generation to generation. So you can kind of see how it becomes an arms race of sorts and how organisms are so well adapted to their particular biological niche after, eons of time. All right, that's all I have for you guys for this lesson, Unit 7, Lesson 4. Hopefully you learned something new, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.